the Liberty Podcast with Clint Armitage. We are proclaiming liberty one show at a time, and the next one starts right now. All right, how's it going, everybody? Clint Armitage, Liberty Podcast. So we've been going through Judges chapter 6 and 7 over the last few episodes here. We got through actually part 5. And so part 6 is pretty much the end of what we're going to be talking about, which is the kind of the story of the warrior Gideon, who becomes this warrior that was a weakling. And now God has shown him, convinced him, confirmed to him that he's a warrior. He is now a warrior and into a huge battle that God actually helps him win. And so that's where we're at. We finished up part 5, like I said, and now we're into part 6. We got about 15 verses to go in part 6, which is going to finish up chapter 7 of Gideon, and that's where we're going to end it. So hopefully we can get through this in our allotted time. I think we can. So let's jump right in and talk about Gideon. So last time in chapter 7, we got to about verse 8, where God was telling Gideon that he only needs 300 men to go win this battle. And so God funneled down 32,000 men, fighters, to 300 true warriors for Gideon. And now we're going to read on from there, starting in verse 9. So we finished up verse 8, chapter 7, verse 8. Now it's chapter 7, verse 9. Here we go. Let's jump in. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp." So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. Okay, so we'll stop right there for a second. So you see what Gideon is up against here. He's up against multiple peoples, multiple nations here coming together to fight against the Israelites. And what we have here is a ton of enemies here, a ton of fighters for the other side. It says in the end of verse 12, it says, "It was thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore." So what does that tell you? It tells you there is too many people, too many camels to count. So the Israelites are going against this huge army, or multiple armies that are joining together, and all they have is 300 men. So this is totally God showing Gideon that he's the one that's going to win this battle for him. And so that's what God is saying here, right? He told him, hey, if you are in the middle of the night, as a matter of fact, the Lord woke Gideon up and said, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it into your hands. And if you're afraid to attack, then basically go to the camp and listen in with your servant Purah and find out what you're going to hear. And that will give you the confidence, and you'll be encouraged to attack the camp." So God is leading Gideon by the hand, man. I mean, he is totally with him, like side by side, or, right in front of him. But he's leading him and giving him all the information he needs to encourage him to fight the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the other nations that are against him. But God is giving him the courage, the confidence, and the confirmation that he's with him. All right, so let's move on to verse 13. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. "I had a dream," he was saying. "A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed." His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped God. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up, the Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them, with torches inside. Verse 17 says, "Watch me," he told them. "Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, blow your trumpets and shout for the Lord and for Gideon." Okay, so again, we'll stop right there and kind of break that down a little bit. he goes down to the camp just like God says. God wakes him up, says, hey, go down to the camp with your servant Purah. Listen to these guys. They're going to tell you something and you're going to be encouraged to attack. Well, he goes down and what's happening, he can hear inside this tent or, where these two guys are talking, and he gets there just in time. See, God's perfect timing is incredible. He wakes him up, tells him to go right now. So he goes down there, and what does he hear? One guy talking about his dream, telling another guy, and then the other guy says, oh, this can only be the Midianites are going to be given into Gideon's hands because God is going to give him the battle. And so this totally encourages Gideon. Okay, so one thing to talk about, the round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. Okay, so this is the dream that he has, and then his buddy interprets the dream for him. Says this can only be none other than Gideon, the sword of Gideon. Okay, one thing to note: a loaf of barley bread back in those times was considered poor man's food, and so a round loaf of barley bread came tumbling down into the Midianite camp. So basically, talking about something weak or something poor, something of non-significance, something lowly is rolling down, coming down, striking the camp of the Midianites, hitting the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. So there's some symbolism here. Back in those days would mean something. And so it represents Gideon and the Israelites. Something that's insignificant is coming down with such force to strike the tent, and then it collapses, which is basically saying the Midianite camp is going to collapse here, and it's going to be Gideon that strikes it. And so his friend basically responded saying, hey, this is nothing other than, the sword of Gideon. And God, he says it specifically, God has given the Midianites into Gideon's hands. What's happening here is God is utilizing the enemy to give encouragement to Gideon and his army. And that is just amazing, right? God is using the enemy to encourage his people. That can happen sometimes where you don't feel confident. You're still, remember, Gideon, he's been getting better and getting more confident and getting confirmations from God, but he still has some doubt. That's why God tells him, hey, get up, go down there. You're going to hear this specific thing, and it's going to encourage you to go attack the camp. And then when he heard this, what did he do? He ran back to his camp, the Israelites, and said, hey, get up, let's go. God is going to give this battle into our hands. And so it encourages him massively. And so when we hear the enemies or the opposition being afraid, then we'll also be encouraged. When we have opposition, if we have obstacles, we have things in our way, but those things, we get information from the other side to give us confidence, because God is giving us confidence. As long as it's not manipulation and God has told you, hey, this is what you're going to hear, then it should encourage you. And that's what God was doing here with Gideon. He needed some encouragement, and that's what he got from this. Okay. So does that sound similar to anything else? If you think about it, it does. It actually sounds a little bit like when Joshua sent the two spies into Jericho, and the spies spoke to Rahab. What did Rahab tell them? She said, hey, we are afraid of you guys because of what God has done for you, because of what they did to the king of Bashan and Og and all that. The townspeople of Jericho were afraid of the Israelites. And they heard that from Rahab, who was there in Jericho. She was part of the town of Jericho. So again, in that case, the spies from the Israelites heard encouraging news from the enemy, which encouraged them to attack as well. So we're starting to hear that same type of theme here with Gideon. Now Gideon's hearing it. Okay, we're gonna match up another thing that actually is pretty similar to what happened at Jericho as well. So let's get back into it here. As they did that, the friend interpreted the dream, so they think they're going to lose. It gives encouragement to Gideon, and then he goes right back. Well, first of all, he worshiped God. It says in verse 15, when Gideon heard the dream and the interpretation, he worshiped God. And that's what we should be doing. Once we hear a confirmation from God, we understand it is God telling us and encouraging us that we are going to win this battle. We need to worship him right away. We need to praise him right away, because God is the reason, right? That's the reason why we are winning the battles, because God is giving us the ability, the confidence, and the tools, and he's going to lead us into battle and win the battle for us. Okay, so we should worship him. And then immediately Gideon returned to camp, and he called out to the Israelites, hey, get up. The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands. And then he immediately started into dividing the 300 men into 3 different companies, 100 men each, right? A company. So he divided them, and there's a tactical thing in there too, which we'll read, but he divides 300 men into 3 separate companies. Then he says he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them with torches inside. Verse 17, watch me, he told them, follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. Okay, does that sound familiar too? I hope it does, because it's similar to Jericho. Again, the same type of thing. God is telling Gideon here, hey, take trumpets, which is what God told Joshua, told the priests, hey, bring out 7 trumpets, 7 priests, 7 trumpets. And then he also said to Joshua, he said, hey, walk around Jericho 7 times. Well, one time for 6 days each day, 1 time, and then the 7th day 7 times. Well, it's kind of similar here in terms of surrounding the camp or the objective, because you see what Gideon says here. He says, watch me, follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. So he's saying he's going to get to the edge of the camp. Then it says, when I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, blow yours and shout. So what does that tell you? That means he strategically placed these companies around the camp. Like Joshua did with the Israelites at Jericho, they went around, they encircled that whole city of Jericho. Well, in this case, they have 300 companies, or 300 men broken up into 3 companies, and those 3 companies are at the edge of the camp in different areas to encircle the camp. So they've encircled the camp. What does that look like in the dark? Well, if you don't know it's only 300 men, it looks like a lot more when you're looking up above at the edge of the camp and you're seeing, a bunch of people there and then a bunch of people there and a bunch of people there surrounding the camp. It appears as if you're fully surrounded, especially at night, right? So that's what it looks like. God's having them encircle the camp just like he did at Jericho, and he has them blowing trumpets and he has them shouting. That happened at Jericho as well. So there's some similar themes here that's happening with Gideon as it did with Joshua and the Israelites back in Jericho. So we see some similarities here. All right, so now it says they blew their trumpets and then they broke the jars that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow. They shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. Verse 27, when the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. The army fled to Bethshittah toward Zererah, as far as the border of Abel Mohala near Tabith. Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh were called out, and they pursued the Midianites. Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them as far as Beth Barah. So that's kind of finished up. We'll finish up the rest of it here. It says, so all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they took the waters of the Jordan as far as Beth Barah. They also captured 2 of the Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeeb at the winepress of Zeeb. They pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon, who was by the Jordan. Let's talk about the similarities again with Jericho and the camp here of the Midianites in the book of Judges here for Gideon. Same thing happened. God had them blow the trumpets and shout. He did that at Jericho. Then what happened? A miracle happened. In Jericho, the walls fell down. Something unimaginable happened. Well, something unimaginable again happened here when Gideon and all his company that were surrounding the camp, they blew their trumpets, they shouted, the torches went up and all that stuff. The Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. Then the 300 trumpets sounded, and it caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. So they all started fighting each other just because the trumpets were blowing, confusion, the torches were coming out, they were yelling, and they appeared that they were surrounded. So they started fighting each other because of the confusion. So what did God do again? He made sure that Gideon and his army did not actually fight. They didn't fight. The Midianites fought themselves, where everybody in the camp, remember they had different tribes, the Amalekites and the Midianites and the other eastern peoples. So they were fighting each other in all the confusion. Well, what happened at Jericho? Same thing. They did not actually fight. God took the walls down at Jericho. after they shouted, after they blew the trumpets. So God is leading this fight here, in this battle here, and Gideon is winning just by following God. And God's commands, in this case, again, was not to go in and actually strike anybody down. He didn't have to do that. All he had to do was blow trumpets and shout. So God did it again. In similarity here, okay, if we're talking about battles and we're talking about life struggles and leadership issues and battles and obstacles that we have to get through and overcome, whatever it is, we have to understand if we bring it to God and God tells us to do it a certain way, there's a reason for it. Don't doubt. It may seem off. It may seem odd. It may seem embarrassing. It may seem like you're doing something weird. Matter of fact, I heard this story. A buddy of mine in Texas told me this story. This is what he said. He said, okay, so this lady got a calling. The Lord told her to go into I think it was a 7-Eleven, but it was a convenience store, to go into the store and stand on her head in the store. And of course, that is ridiculous, right? It appears to be ridiculous. It seems weird. And I don't know how many people would do it. I don't know if I would do it. You know, even if I knew God said, hey, go in there, go into that 7-Eleven, go into that convenience store and stand on your head, I'd be like, nah, that's too weird. I don't know if I do that. Well, this lady did that. She followed through with what God asked her to do, which seemed a little weird at the time. So she did that. She gets in the store, does this handstand. Right as she does this handstand, the employee comes out of the back, sees it, and goes, I can't believe it. She goes, what? And the employee says, I asked God, because I was going to kill myself. I was going to commit suicide. And I said, if God, you're real and you don't want me to do this kind of thing, then I need you to send someone into the store to do a handstand. And she came in to do the handstand. Because why? Because God cares about every single person. There's stuff we don't know about. There's another realm that we don't know about. We don't know what's going on. God knows everything. That person requested that God have someone come in, stand on their head, and then they would not commit suicide. And God obliged, just like Gideon asked for these signs. God obliged, even though the messenger had to do something weird, right? Gideon had to do something weird. Blow trumpets, for a war, only fight with 300 men, and they didn't even fight. Have torches, have trumpets, break jars. I mean, what kind of battle strategy is that? It's God's strategy because he has other plans. He knows what's going to happen. He knows the outcome of this. And so we have to start realizing that even if God asks us to do something a little bit off, or it seems to be weird, or it seems to be embarrassing, if you know God is telling you to do it, we have to do it. There's other reasons that we have no idea about. And like I said, I would have had a tough time with my standing on my head in a convenience store. I would have definitely had a struggle with that one. I don't know if I would have done it. Even though, and that's what we have to tell ourselves, like, hey, if we know it's God, we have to try to follow through. And the more we can follow through with the little things, the more bigger things we'll be able to handle and able to follow God through, even if it may be embarrassing before. But as we get stronger in the Lord and get more connection to him and understand him and hear him better, hear his voice, we're going to be able to get a little bit, stronger in terms of mentally and say, hey, you know what? I know the Lord told me to do this, so I'm going to do it. And then you just go through and do it. And the more that God can trust you to do what he's asking you to do, the more battles he's going to be able to put you in so you could be successful and win. And the more times he's going to be able to confirm to you that he's with you. These are ways that God confirms that he's with you. And then he's making your faith stronger, and then you're getting more closer to him. All these good things come out of this, but we have to realize that it's not about us. We can't control things. We have to just listen to God and follow through. All right? So I hope this encouraged you. We just finished up part 6 of Weakling to Warrior. My name is Clint Armitage. This is the Liberty Podcast, and I'm so glad you were able to join me for this final episode of the series, Weakling to Warrior. Until next time, keep winning those battles and stay safe, stay motivated, and keep seeking liberty. Joining us for another episode of the Liberty Podcast with Clint Armitage. If you want to get in touch, email us at info@clintarmitage.com.